Thunderbirds 6 was released in 1968 and would be the second and final big screen outing for International Rescue.
Yeah, but what about...
No.
Let's have a rundown on Thunderbird 6.
Once again, Alan Tracy takes centre stage as he accompanies Lady Penelope, Tintin and Parker aboard the maiden flight of Skyship One, a futuristic airship designed by Brains.
Well, it looks as if we're all set for a lovely, peaceful holiday.
Little do they realise though that the crew of the airship are imposters, working for a mysterious villain who plans to lure Thunderbirds 1 and 2 to his base in Casablanca so that he can capture them for his own ends.
If pilots offer any resistance as they leave their machines, shoot them down.
Meanwhile, Jeff Tracy has given Brains the task of designing a new international rescue vehicle.
We now need a Thunderbird 6.
Although since he doesn't know exactly what he wants the new machine to be able to do, the project isn't going very well. As the crew of Skyship One reveal their true natures, a gunfight damages the ship's engines, forcing it to crash into a tower over a missile base.
We need to decide a course of action, but fast. As far as I can see, any attempt to get near that ship is going to bring a disaster.
With Skyship One gradually becoming heavier as its turbines shut down, a way must be found to evacuate the airship's passengers before it falls from the tower. And Brains has also still got to design that Thunderbird 6 before the end of the film.
I've got a tiger in my tank.
Although Alan's vintage Tiger Moth might just provide the solution to both problems.
It's a brilliant idea.
Despite the poor box office return of 1966's Thunderbirds Are Go, both United Artists and Lou Grade felt that International Rescue deserved another chance to shine on the big screen, and agreed a budget of £300,000 for the sequel.
And now, gentlemen, the moment has come. What is it to be?
Thunderbirds 6 entered production in 1967 and would be filmed alongside Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, although the puppets seen in the new film would retain the disproportionately large heads and hands seen in the original television series.
It's the only possible answer.
Once again, David Lane would handle directing duties while Gerry and Sylvia Anderson wrote the screenplay, which would take a more light-hearted tone than its predecessor.
It's going to land on its home.
And appropriately enough for the final Thunderbirds production, the film also focuses more heavily on the characters of the Tracy family and International Rescue. Although somewhere along the line, Jeff has apparently relaxed security considerably, since Penelope and co quite happily tell anyone who'll listen that they're International Rescue agents.
That's right, Captain Foster. We all of us lead dedicated lives in International Rescue.
With the exception of Ray Barrett, who had now returned to Australia, the entire credited voice cast of the second season of Thunderbirds would return for the new film, and once again, several new actors were also hired.
As president of the New World Aircraft Corporation, this flight is of paramount importance to me.
Jeffrey Keane as NWAC President James Glenn, and John Carson as the smooth imposter Captain Foster make their only contribution to the Gerry Anderson universe with this film.
I didn't think I'd ever forget that.
But Keith Alexander and Gary Files would both be heard and seen in Anderson productions up until UFO.
Attention all defense systems. This is a maximum security alert.
Keith Alexander took over Ray Barrett's role of John Tracy.
Father, I've just received a message from Lady Penelope.
Whose change in voice goes unnoticed by his family, since they so rarely talk to him anymore anyway.
FAB, John. Keep in touch.
Gary Files, meanwhile, voices the mastermind behind the whole scheme, who operates under the codename of Black Phantom, but who also bears a strong resemblance to International Rescue's archenemy, the Hood.
If only I knew their secrets.
Many fans, and indeed Sylvia Anderson herself, maintain that this is not the Hood, but instead a son or some other relative seeking revenge for the Hood's death in the previous film, although nothing in Thunderbird 6 itself gives any definitive answer, one way or another.
Let them have it.
Considering that the Hood had survived multiple car and plane crashes throughout the Thunderbirds television series, then it isn't impossible that he could also have survived the helijet crash that appeared to finish him off in Thunderbirds Are Go. And if this isn't meant to be the Hood, then why reuse such an instantly identifiable puppet in the role of the villain?
The jigsaw's nearly completed, but not quite.
If you're going to do that, then why not let Cliff Richard be the villain instead of reducing him to an extra? Speaking of villainy, the film often exhibits a surprisingly mean-spirited streak that wouldn't be out of place in Captain Scarlet, but is entirely at odds with the usual jolliness of Thunderbirds.
Quickly, we haven't much time.
The scene in which the original crew of Skyship One are ruthlessly gunned down, their bodies later dumped at sea, is a prime example. But we can also add Alan's casual murder of one of the imposter crew during their escape from the airship, and the subsequent whimpering demise of his colleague to the list of the film's very un-Thunderbirdsy moments. Even the regulars don't escape unscathed, as two of the most popular Thunderbirds characters are treated rather shabbily here.
Upset? Me upset? Of course I'm not upset!
Throughout the film, Brains is seen uncharacteristically frustrated and angry at Jeff's continual rejections of his design for a Thunderbird 6, with Jeff being infuriatingly vague about what he's even looking for to begin with.
We desperately need a Thunderbird 6.
Poor old Parker is also made to look a fool throughout the film, most notably in a scene where Alan, Penelope and Tintin laugh about him behind his back, while he's at the door, listening in.
You should have seen Parker's face, Tintin. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Although Brains gets something of a happy ending, even being given his own international rescue uniform for the first and only time, Parker doesn't even get an apology for the way he's been treated, and instead ends the film falling out of a tree after being presumed dead by his so-called friends, who really don't seem that upset at the thought of losing him.
I've only just realised Parker isn't with us. We must have left him aboard the airship.
It's too late now, Penny. Are you sure there was no chance of him surviving when Skyship One crashed?
Not a chance, Ellen.
The globe-trotting storyline of Thunderbird 6 allows plenty of opportunity for the Century 21 team to show off their skill in designing multiple sets and models for each location, everything from an Indian market to an inn in the Swiss mountains. And many of the rooms aboard Skyship One are similarly striking.
Down the crows.
The film also delivers many appealing visual sequences, and the destruction of the missile base near the end of the film is one of the most spectacular Anderson moments of all time. At the other end of the beauty spectrum, we have the film's pre-title sequence, a scene in which Brains lays out his idea for Skyship One, only to be greeted by, well, this. Although meticulously sculpted right down to their tongues and fillings, these laughing heads rolling around and shrieking are one of the most unintentionally terrifying things ever committed to film, and appropriately, this is the only Gerry Anderson moment to have earned the dubious distinction of becoming an internet meme. By the end of the film, Jeff Tracy would finally have his oh-so-important Thunderbird 6, in the form of Alan's Tiger Moth.
Brain, you old son of a gun.
For many of the sequences featuring the aircraft, a full-size Tiger Moth was piloted by Joan Hughes, who had flown Spitfires and Lancasters during the Second World War and was one of Britain's first female pilots.
She's what?
However, during a scene in which she had to fly the Tiger Moth under a bridge on the then unfinished M40 motorway, a sudden crosswind and the extra weight of the dummies strapped to the aircraft meant she was unable to keep her wheels on the ground as the law required for such a stunt. Hughes and production manager Norman Foster found themselves in court over this in March 1968.
How dreadful.
But after a 2-day hearing, the case was dismissed with the defendants found not guilty.
So you don't think there's anything to worry about, Penelope?
No.
The incident gained the film some attention in the media, but not enough to prevent another lackluster box office opening and a lukewarm critical response.
I don't like the sound of it, Dad.
Despite being completed in December 1967, Thunderbird 6 wouldn't premiere until July 29th the following year.
Thunderbirds are back on the cinema screen in a brand new space-age adventure in Technicolor and Technoscope. revealing to the world for the first time their latest, most closely guarded top secret.
By which time, public interest in Thunderbirds and Supermarionation generally was in decline.
We've no idea what's going on.
The third film in the Thunderbirds trilogy that Lou Grade had agreed with United Artists before the television series had even aired was permanently shelved.
What's the point?
And there would be no further adventures from the original Thunderbirds team.
The end product just doesn't justify the cost.
Over the years, Thunderbirds 6 has received a mixed response from fans of the show.
Well, I guess we've seen a lot of launchings, but this'll beat all.
Many appreciate its greater focus on the show's characters and more light-hearted tone, despite the occasional moment of darkness, although others would argue that by the end of Thunderbirds 6, the original Thunderbirds concept had been diluted to such an extent that much of its appeal had been lost. However, if the Thunderbirds saga had to come to an end, then Thunderbirds 6 is overall a fine note to go out on.
Launch Thunderbird 6.
The film makes good use of many of the show's characters, and the story delivers some spectacular moments that are superbly realised by the Century 21 team in this one final visit to the original Tracy Island.
Movements are graceful, although he can